Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Fast Forward 2030 event, where we celebrate us being part of nature. I'm Joanna Jordi, architect with a master's in biomimicry and a member of Fast Forward 2030. Now, our objective as Fast Forward 2030 is to disseminate and implement sustainable development goals. And what better way to implement the global goals than to learn from 4.8 billion years of nature's evolution and how, as Janine Benyus beautifully puts it, life creates conditions conducive to life. So, ladies and gentlemen, biomimicry is the conscious emulation of nature's genius. And it's the purpose of biomimicry is to learn from nature's patterns, systems, forms, processes, in order to best thrive within the constraints of our planet. So the panelists that will be presenting today are brilliant entrepreneurs who are able to integrate biomimicry into their work. So I will introduce the first panelist. Our first panelist is Richard James Mcroll. Richard is a multidisciplinary designer and an urbanist. He is the founder of Biomimicry UK, Biomimicry Innovation Lab, and Stable
Smart Stable Limited.
Start Stable Limited. He also taught in many universities and gave workshops to in many universities and for many big companies. So let us welcome Richard. Richard, the platform is yours.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm trying not to do the Truman Show here by saying that kind of thing. So I thought I'd start off before, so I'm going to give you a little idea of not presenting our work, but actually some of the things I learned through my journey of looking to the natural world. But I thought I'd start with some a little challenge for you all. So what would you think of a company who destroyed a fragile ecosystem to get certain metals that can be made into partitions for transportation? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Just put yes or no in the chat. Yes, it's a question. Now, think of a second company who said they used lightweight materials, looking into optimization solutions to make partitions for aircraft, that they're lightweighted and 3D printed. And then their claims on their website that they're looking at sustainable transport solutions. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. It depends on the factors. The answer to that is they're both actually the same companies. This is an aircraft manufacturing company who claims on their website that they are making lightweight partitions by looking into how trees branch and slime mold. And unfortunately, what they don't tell people that they have to get the precious ores from a mining organization in Australia and destroying fragile habitats in the first place. And the other question is from one of the people that I actually know working in the company, that he said to them, worked on that project, is it's great, but it's only a partition. So sometimes it's about looking at the bigger picture and taking things forward and looking at it that way. So thank you, Joanna, for the great introduction, and thank you to all the team for inviting me along. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I got here, what makes me tick, what annoys me, what makes me talk to people for hours, and understanding how things go as well. So I grew up in northern Scotland, as well as spending some time in Canada, and with a family who've moved around the world. My mother grandparents that grew up in Australia and Papua New Guinea, and I've always been interested in understanding play and building things or breaking things. I'm sure, you know, whether it was Lego, I was a Lego person, I'm sure to some of the architects who are on the call will be able to understand the difference between when you look at architects and they design, some are played with Lego and some played with Meccano. You can almost see that in their buildings going forward. And I was always really interested in actually how things work, but also looking at the bigger system. My grandfather one of my grandfathers was very important to me, and we learned about the systems in place in the Highlands of Scotland where he lived, and understanding how the massive impacts can be made as things are actually changed through you know, industrial level fish farming to you know, what's happening when viruses are spread around, killing of, you know, wild fish and seals and other predatory animals in the sea as well. And this kind of stuck with me a long time. And I actually had delved into, for my first experience of really looking to, you know, nature-inspired design was in the early 1990s at school, when we were looking at this in an art and design project, looking at aircraft and flight and how would you, you know, the integration, but also can you, the replication and, you know, taking out this design and the principles from that, they can improve aircraft flight. Now, my first career was actually not into ecology or design. It was actually into real estate asset management development. And really what frustrated me is this kind of reactive management and not thinking of the bigger picture. I'm sure a lot of you work in the built environment or even working in product design, sustainability, see that, you know, our industries, or a lot of them, are actually powered by reactive maintenance. It's not understanding the bigger picture. It's working balance sheet to balance sheet and not understanding the changes. You know, why don't we just check and actually understand where things come from, and maybe spending a bit more time or even cost, but something that won't break as much. And this really annoyed me. And, I was very fortunate to get made redundant in the economic crash of the late noughties, which allowed me to change careers and actually move more into the design world after working with some clients across Denmark and Sweden, and actually in the UK with big property developers. But once I really got into biomimicry, and about 10 years ago, I did find a lot of tools over promise. And you do find this, that they can all solve all sorts of problems. And I'm a big believer that, you know, you don't just go in with one tool to try and solve everything. There's got to be a range of things, and understanding how they work for you. I'm sure a lot of you coming from different backgrounds learn your mathematics in a different way. You know, I wasn't great at mathematics at school, but once I grasped it in a visual way and actually understanding how you can build these in to actually visualize how buildings or things change and develop by looking at that, got me. So the way I see this is over-promising of tools and understanding how a tool design process works and works for you as well, because everybody thinks and processes information in different ways. Another thing that really come out is a lot of tools that are saying there's shortcuts to innovation, shortcuts to this, the shortcuts to that, and innovation is really hard. It's really messy. And if innovation was easy, you would see any rich trust fund child, you know, kid, early 20s, once they got their millions, or in some case billions from their parents, would be able to automatically come up with, you know, grand solutions to solve the world. It's not as easy as that. You've got to embrace things as you go along. So what really got me going with this is actually spending a time when I first got into biomimicry 10, 12 years ago. Excuse that, it's probably somebody had an accident outside. Is really picking apart things, what works, what doesn't work, and being very fortunate that, you know, right early on in getting into this area and industry, that I've been spending a lot of time with Julian Vincent. He's been working for biomimicry for 40, 50 years now. Initially looking at composite materials, and there's a lot of his work is in biomaterials, especially looking at structure. And it's really about pushing and probing and changing. And this goes back to actually looking at tools that overpromise. And maybe it's that they don't work for me. Maybe it's about understanding and developing these mindsets. I know this is a bit vague at the moment, I'll get to the point. So it's about really understanding what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and finding these different ones. You know, one of the key challenges with anything is not about what problem we're trying to solve, is actually getting the team on board in the first place. You know, how do you change the mindsets of a company you're going into, or even the team within your, you know, your small team? How do you get them understanding and moving forward? What skills, resources, you know, everything else that you can bring into that. before you even go in to start taking the brief and ripping it up if you're given to a client. It's really about just asking questions. I enjoy asking questions about things. Why does this work? Why does this not work? You know, it's a bit like, you know, design thinkers ask why, 4-year-old children ask why, and so do the Backstreet Boys. Keep asking why, keep questioning things, understanding how they work and picking apart. You know, I've now got to the stage where I look at a lot of design tools out there, and I'm sure a lot of you can do that as Google Research Scholar, Biomimicry, design process, biomimetics. There's so many out there because everybody's looking at a way to understand and fit into their way of growing up, the way of thinking, the way of processing, the way of their industry works, to align these together. And what works for me may not work for you. And I find this is a very useful way to get into understanding when we work with clients, whether it's you know, even giving public talks or even running workshops, is understanding what ways of communication, how do they, you know, do they think, do they work, what process, because if you're introducing something completely new, not every company's got things like interface, well, you know, or other company, Patagonia, or any of these, you know, really went and did the whole mind shift change, because it can take a long time, especially if you've got shareholders and companies don't have a big R&D lab, that they're not really interested in taking this on. I'll just wait for this card to pass. And the key thing really here is taking these tools and even understanding the tools, but actually embracing failure through your design, keep pushing and prodding and seeing how things don't work. I don't know if anyone has heard about, there's a person called Katie Patrick, and she does a lot of work in systems and actually how to save the world and environmental, you know, sustainability. And she came from, well, grew up in America, but then lived most of her life in Australia, moved back. But to get to the point, her friends were everywhere. Can anyone see my screen?
Yes.
It just came up as your screen share.
And there's only an introduction. Oh, yes. Okay.
Give me a second. I think I've got 2 slides up.
So, Richard, the slides weren't passing through, and we were at the introduction slides.
Can you see this now?
Not yet.
No, we don't see your screen yet. Okay, asking questions. Okay, yes, we can see your slides.
Is it the yellow one?
No, I think it's the previous asking questions.
Yeah, how frustrating. You can see that. I'll just run it like this. It's easier. So the next thing is really about from moving around from embracing failure is really understanding the bigger picture. And this is where coming in and using different tools and understanding these methods, you know, very much it's about looking at the bigger systems and understanding which ones, what parts of the system can you change, which ones are going to make the most negative impacts and the greater outcomes. Because if you think of something like manufacturing, it can be quite challenging to actually change the, you know, the manufacturing process. If you say you're going to go into working with a, you know, a car manufacturer when they've got these processes in place in hundreds of factories around the world, or unless you're doing something completely changing that like Tesla, but can you actually then look at things that, is it part of the supply chain, new materials, is it looking at the waste streams and understanding that as well? It's really understanding what the limits of biomimicry or biomimetics. Where does it work? Where does it not? So the areas that we're looking into is life cycle analysis. We, you know, I use design future tools, you know, backcasting. Some of our projects we're working on in the ecological sphere in India and Madagascar and in South Africa is very much looking at ecosystem services and ecological engineering. You know, you're looking at what tools can help you prototyping. Is it simulations? Is it using AI? Is it making physical model? Understanding all these parts of the process, because if you just take biomimicry on its own, it's really just a small snapshot of the entire process to go from, you know, changing the mindset of a company to create something that's successful out there, because you really need to understand how you're developing, you know, is it tools to understand new business models? Is it manufacturing processes? Is it tools to help you get to the right level of technology readiness? Is it ways you can actually look at what your marketing strategy is to actually sell the product? Is it the right place as well? One of the areas that really got me is this actually area of thinking about nature in different ways and comparing the two. So Julian Vincent, when he was at his research lab at the University of Bath, looked at how comparing technology and biology and really simplified down a larger contradiction matrix, which looking at trade-offs and how to 6 areas of things that do things somewhere. And this is effectively looking at, you know, how do we use, in man-made stuff, we use lots of energy and lots of substances to make things that nature does through structure and information, and changing how they can do them in space and time. Because the interesting thing this brings up by looking space and time is actually understanding that the circular economy and circularity and this notion of, you know, no waste is a long time frame, because you are talking in geological time frames and not actually in the time frame of you and I as a human. You know, over our lifespan, things can take a long time to break down. So it's understanding that, you know, the limits to that, because actually, do we ever get to total circularity, or is that kind of a utopia? And we start thinking low trend entropy kind of solutions. And the really other thing for any entrepreneur moving forward is actually embrace the messiness of all this. You know, it's not about having a toolkit that just gets you through and suddenly you'll become this amazing, you know, innovator, entrepreneur, and understanding that there's back and forth and changes and plans, and some of your way you're looking at the world will change, and actually testing and flipping it around. To get back to the point when I was talking about the slides, is actually the reason why a lot of new technologies are very quickly coming out of places like Silicon Valley is because they embrace the failure and kept pivoting and retesting. Think about, you know, a film I watched the other day is Jurassic Park. Think about how the raptors were continually testing the cage to look for weaknesses. Keep doing that. And there's a reason why a lot of environmentalists are still going on about the same things over and over and over again. And they've done it for 20, 30 years, because they're not finding the right way to get in the message across. And that could be the way their language is. So they're not pulling the heartstrings of people, or that it's just outdated, because actually the better ways to doing that. So it's knowing this and actually pushing this forward. And it's back to this thing, is knowing your limitations about everything. Doesn't, you know, you can't know everything. The people you work with can't know everything, but work within those boundaries. There's a great writer who looks into business strategy and team building called Matthew Said. He used to be a professional athlete, and his book's called Rebel Ideas, and it's knowing about how to build a super team. And what you do is you're having a boundary you work in, and you have slightly overlapping skills. You don't want everybody from the same background, the same university, the same country as well, because everybody learns about things in a different way, and building that together. And to really summarize up, it's about taking this holistic viewpoint. I very much, every time I look at a project, or I'm teaching, or I'm speaking, it's about understanding what really gets the message across. What works for one industry may not work for another. And I was told very early on, I'm sure a lot of designers, don't fall in love with your prototype. But the same thing can actually happen, is you don't fall in love with your biological mechanisms as well. Because you can have this nature fallacy of thinking nature is the best. And sometimes what you're trying to understand, sometimes our man-made technology can actually work in harmony with it. There's recent research saying that nature-based solutions actually work more effectively if you actually have them with grey infrastructure as well. Because you don't want to be falling into the trap of actually thinking everything's great. The university course in Georgia Tech, they actually use really ugly animals and things that don't look nice to actually get their students to understand, so they don't fall in love with things like, oh, here's a little puppy and a chimpanzee baby and things like that. And the final thing to bring this together is really embracing the diversity of tools, ways to look at things, and if something seems too good to be true, it generally is, and start investigating how nature works, what doesn't work. One of the areas that we're really looking at the moment, we've got a database of over 500 solutions, over 3,000 different papers examining that, and we're looking at solutions, anything that's later stage towards the market, how they work, where they don't work, what is their market readiness, their customer readiness, their technology, their manufacturing, all these things to see what works and what doesn't work. Because some of the things, especially if you're moving forward is, how do you manufacture at scale biomaterials when they're competing against basically the waste or the waste as a resource coming out from the fossil fuel industry to make a new material. So that's kind of a snapshot of kind of how I think, work and develop things moving forward. If you want to get in touch, there's my contact details. I don't mind sharing the slides around afterwards. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, Richard. So what you're saying is that the critical thinking is something that is very important in the design process. It has to be continuous. So we always want to question our designs and our systems.
Yeah, every stage. I mean, one of the things that I got from one of my business partners at one of the businesses is, you want an enabler to go through every stage. They don't need to be the expert in that, but just know how to go from, initial working with a team to getting to the brief. And then you want people to even come in and start killing the idea very, very quickly so you don't waste money. You can go into some other area as well.
Knowing the limitations is also very key. So really understanding the constraints and the limitations and working around them.
Think of the limitations we've got when we were working in biomimicry. Where the heck do you start? Do you go from the smallest thing to the biggest thing and everything in between? And I'm always saying to people, whether it's companies, build up your collection of just areas that you're focusing on, really get into detail and understand how things work. Get out there. I'm sure a lot of you, if you don't follow Carlos Rego, who works in packaging design, and he just spends half his time crawling in his hands and knees outside his office looking at plants. We discussed actually just setting up, you can look at just plant biomechanics, or you take a trip to, working with Thomas Speck at the Freiburg Botanical Gardens, because they just focus on plant biomechanics and physiology. And they have been doing that for like 30, 40 years.
Another key element that you also mentioned is that we focus on the scientific part of nature, that we really dive into the science in nature and not the superficial, what we see in a superficial manner. And it's really to dive into the mechanisms of that are scientifically proven in order to get this inspiration to properly implement it in our designs.
Yeah, it's about understanding. We've got a lot of tools out there now that people research are actually understanding it a lot more. We can delve deeper. Quite a lot of the work now I'm seeing with one of our collaborators is actually moving beyond this and going to biodesign. How do we look at processes that we're seeing? Biological processes are out there for creating enzymes, as I say, breaking down plastic, or creating biomaterials out of seaweed that can then use as an alternative backing for carpet tiles, or one research group that are actually creating stuff of actually, I don't see the point of it myself, but growing fake fur for luxury clothing brands. But these kind of things of actually understanding things moving forward. I think you can get very hamstrung because, and I've been the same, and everybody I speak to, whether people have been in this 40 years, 10 years, as you get really obsessed with the natural world, and we should do because it's brilliant, but we also understand that it's good at what it does, and there's not as much translation. It's hard to really understand what it does. Because here's a question to ask your people. Maybe Mcroll knows in Davos can do this when they're having some drinks tonight. What is life? There you go. That's a deep one to consider.
Definitely. And what part do we play in this life? So this is also an important question.
Because one of the things, there's an interesting article actually, why we're all talking about regenerative design when we've not even solved the sustainability problem yet. And even we're doing that badly, but then sustainability isn't that the framework that allows us to regenerative design as the process to get that. Because all we're doing is trying to sustain life, whether it's for us or the, everything else that's on the planet.
Definitely, that's the grand objective. I also want to invite our participants to ask questions, if you like. It's an interactive session, so I invite everyone to share their questions. One question is, has any design was created with biomimicry, but then was proven false at the end, that this concept from biomimicry was proven false during the research and development phase?
There's one actually, people hate me saying this, is actually the bullet train. They were developing that for 15 years until the design team actually said that they wanted to, that was kind of post-rationalization. And that was just found out by accident when he was going to be the lead designer engineer was going to be presenting that in the UK. And I know this researcher is from Japan, just checked through all the papers, and there's absolutely no mention of the kingfisher or the kookaburra at all. And actually, it could well be that the kingfisher that he was talking about in his presentations are ones that may not even dive into water in the first place. But you see a lot of drug companies, you see a lot of biotech companies, and a lot of these are actually looking where they start dropping nature. Yeah, and it's one of the things that I work with one of our clients and investors is actually, you know, I don't care if they drop biomimicry because it's moving beyond, let's say beyond, or you can't scale it to a certain way. As long as you're solving a problem that's better, you know, it doesn't pollute the environment, does it matter? Because sometimes that's where kind of bio branding comes into play. And I remember Mcroll shared me with, it was a logistics firm, never mentions biomimicry at all, and it's good because why should they? Because they don't need to if they're coming up with something better, because it doesn't matter. And we've, you know, I have a friend of mine who works in marketing, says the first rule of biomimicry is don't mention biomimicry. It's a bit like Fight Club, you know, because it's about an outcome, sell the outcomes to people, the positive benefits, because it's a process.
So it's one of the innovative thinking processes, but doesn't have to be the only one. The important thing is the objective and that it be viable, so ecologically viable, and that it functions properly.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. So I want to share a question that one of our participants shared. Even if we have the solutions we need to the right kind of material and energy, economies to support our human civilization, what about the economy that underpins it all? My perspective is that as long as we are in the context of a commodity, money, interest-bearing, debt-based economy, anything, oh, just scrolling.
Was that the end of the question? Sorry, I was reading another one.
Oh, okay. Just 1 minute, I just. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, just.
Okay. So talk about, you know, the bigger economics, you know, it's just changing the system. You're seeing a lot of work with donut economics and understanding that, you know, any decisions that should be made in a financial sense, money spending, anything, you know, the limits of growth is always understanding the value of the natural world. You know, corporate accounting should be tied into that. Research in the UK has been carried out recently by our government looking into, you know, the value of nature and this as well, because it's about understanding when you, every time you make a decision, how that's impacting where you're buying it from, you know, with people of fast fashion, how that's, you know, actually impacting negatively in places around across the world where you don't even get to see, because, you know, somebody somewhere for that cheap piece of clothing is getting impacted on it, and something somewhere is getting impacted, and, you know, the polluting chemicals as well. And it's making this understanding that, you know, companies should really be, you know, putting more of their own, you know, CEOs should be laying down the line for this and not just, you know, flippantly just agreeing to something, but it's so vague. I mean, I am seeing that coming from the UK, where actually we're now looking at increasing, you know, coal mining in certain areas, despite the fact that, you know, the UK hosted COP26, and actually it's not going forward. And that's the same thing you could be said like places like China, where they're actually pushing very much for the green economy, but actually at the same time, almost every single day they're opening up a coal-powered power station, because, you know, it's that trade-off between, can you make enough, you know, of the green economy, green tech, to balance out the energy needs of vastly growing populations.
So this is what you mean by seeing the bigger picture, is seeing how actually the design or the system created impacts the ecology on a global level, or impacts the community, or the community as a whole.
Yes.
Okay, so next question, how do you consider that the collaborative economy can contribute financially to bioprojects?
Ooh, that's a tough one. So kind of, yeah, collective intelligence. I've been involved with a number of these, and, you know, can't be allowed through the fact that, micropayments for certain areas, funding projects that way. I do think there's this kind of design of opening up to the entire crowd that everybody can get paid. This is where, Web 3.0 could come in, and using blockchain as a way to democratize that, so everybody gets some, financial return and understanding that's, there's some trust involved there, because that then, if we start looking at those kind of areas, then we can actually start getting the trust back, instead of, something that really kills our, the patent system is a great way to kill the ideas, so universities.
Okay, a question: has anyone looked at Dave Snowden's work on sense making, qualitative data and storytelling? I'm wondering what the panelists think about the role of the stories we tell ourselves and each other about where we are and where we are going, and how biomimicry can inform better stories for a better future. It's a good question.
We're actually finishing off an online course, and it's all built around storytelling and giving those little nuggets of information. It's never going to teach people how to be, get expertise in it, but it's getting people awareness. So it's like, I like to tell my kids about how the cowboy industry was killed off by biomimicry because they invented better barbed wire. Or we've got an amazing graphic designer who's just done pictures of aquaporin, which is the membrane, for filtering out anything bar water, and they're bouncers to not let anything else into a nightclub or things like that. It's giving, because people remember stories, they pass them on, and you take people on that journey.
Thank you so much, Richard. Okay, for time's sake, now we're going to pass to our next esteemed panelist. So I will present to you Adib Dada, a brilliant Lebanese architect and founder of The Other Dada. He successfully integrates biomimicry and biophilic design into his architectural projects. He also works on ecological restoration, more specifically in the Beirut River, the Riverless project, where he reintegrated the ecosystem of the Beirut River by using the Miyawaki technique, which is a Japanese technique. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Adib Dada. Adib Dada, the platform is yours. Adib, I think you're
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute, so because it was disabled. Okay, great. Thank you, Joanna, and everyone on the team for this interesting series of talks. Let me share my screen. And okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we see the Beirut River Garden.
Great. Okay, so the title of my talk today is The Other Way, which is a bit kind of like our approach, which is a nature-based approach to business and our work in general. The whole idea came that at the moment, cities are not serving us well, from air pollution to the urban heat increase, alarming cancer rate and cardiovascular diseases, environmental degradation cost, very little green space per capita, especially for us in Beirut, water pollution, landfills, and so on. And so the idea is, how do we address the sister crises of biodiversity loss, climate change, and human rights abuses? And for me, it's about understanding our place within nature, moving from this kind of like egotistical type of pyramid into more of an ecosystem where every stakeholder is of equal footing. And it's about moving beyond sustainability into regeneration. So instead of society and ecology being at the service of economy, we have to move to a model where economy is a tool for society to live sustainably on planet Earth. And it's about understanding that we need to move beyond just sustainability into interdependence. So understanding that the health of the planet is directly linked to human health and directly linked to the health of the built environment. So how can we as designers create conditions to support other life, not just that of our own species? So obviously we look to nature to inspire a better urban, a better built environment, inspired from my studies in biomimicry. And with biomimicry, we always start with this kind of like central question, you know, how does nature ... like how does nature solve, you know, this specific challenge? And there's 3 different levels of emulation. One is about emulating the form, which is the simplest type of biomimicry emulation. The other level is mimicking a certain process. And finally, the most complex is the emulating a system, like the system of a forest. So I'm going to give you some specific examples related to my own work. So for example, a challenge that I faced early on is how does nature maintain relationships? My own challenge is that I come from a, you know, from a family business that has existed for 50 years called Data and Associates. And I've always wanted to venture into my own firm to follow my own passions and my different value system, which is related to sustainability and regeneration. And it was always this kind of tension between, you know, like, does that mean I become a competitor with a family firm? Is there a way to collaborate? Is there a way to actually share resources? And by looking at nature, you can find a lot of symbiotic mutualistic relationships, such as the clownfish and the anemone. So the clownfish is this little tiny, really cute creature that is very attractive and tasty, and it needs, you know, it needs protection in the ocean environment. And so it has developed this mutualistic relationship with the sea anemone, which is which stings any other organisms that approaches it, except for the clownfish. And in return, the clownfish actually cleans the anemone from any sort of debris and parasites which would harm it. So this kind of gave me the idea that yes, we could coexist and also have kind of win-win interactions by sharing resources, by finding different niches in which to evolve and thrive. Another challenge is about, you know, how does nature thrive? And nature thrives by being locally attuned and responsive and cultivating cooperative relationships. So very early on, I started creating lots of relationships with different entities, whether you know, academic institutions such as like the, you know, AUB where I studied, the family office, Data and Associates, the communication studio, MFB, arts organizations, the Biomimicry Institute, the Ministry of Energy and Water, and Habitat, you name it. So it was really about kind of growing that network in a really intentional manner. So not just, you know, like not just as you grow friends on like Facebook, but it's really in an intentional manner and really cultivating these relationships. And another challenge was, how does nature build resilience? So for me, it came up to, you know, in nature, it's about having diversity. So in a prairie, it's about having a diversity of grasses, annuals, perennials, different organisms. So for me, it translated into having a diversity of projects. And then each project could, you know, could fill a certain niche. And then, for example, when the, you know, when the economic crisis hit in Lebanon, the architectural side of my work took, you know, was almost stopped. But then the forest making part of the business actually, you know, moved up higher, so that became a way for us to sustain ourselves. So we do lots of different things. We work in architecture, landscape, renovations, interiors, work on art consultancy, environmental consultancy, master planning. We work on making forests, and we work also with academic institutions and do our own research. So for example, in one part of the business, it's about building human habitats. And so this is the architectural side. And the premise is, what if our buildings were safe and regenerative, free from toxic chemicals and beneficial to the surrounding communities, considering the whole life cycle of a project, its functionality, the quality, and therefore the experience of its users. So what if our buildings could act like trees? You know, the leaves of trees can actually cool the air through evapotranspiration, but they also filter pollutants. They absorb sound and block rainfall. They provide shade. They reduce wind speed. What if our buildings could actually do that? Do the same? So for one particular challenge of a villa that we were designing in Saudi Arabia, the question was, how does nature control heat? So looking at some champion organisms from nature, we came across the termite mounds. The termites. And termites are about, like these really tiny organisms, about 2 millimeters tall. And they build these really huge mounds that are about 4 meters high and go like about 1 to 2 meters deep as well. Their challenge is that they need to maintain a constant temperature year round. They also need to protect from predators, so cannot have like just big openings there. So their solution is to design these self-cooling mounds that can ventilate, cool, and heat entirely through natural means by using biomass, so the material itself and its thickness, and very cleverly positioned really tiny openings. So the benefit is that they can maintain an optimal constant temperature year-round, which varies to only 1 degree between winter, summer, day, and night. So just to give you an example, ourselves as smart humans, our cities use about 20% of the world's energy to keep our structures within 1 degree Celsius year-round. So we definitely have a lot to learn from these small organisms. So in this case, this is the house that we built. So again, inspired by the termite mounds and also inspired by the traditional wind towers that are prevalent in the region, we input our house model into a CFD model, and we really looked at the prevailing winds, and we identified specific areas in the house that could really benefit from these hybrid between like a wind tower and a termite mound. And eventually we have these 2 rooms within the house where basically they almost never use any air conditioning year round. So they're able to comfortably sit in these rooms. One is the family room, the other one is the gym area, and then they can use these rooms year round without almost never turning on the air conditioning. And that's in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, so really extreme desert environment. Obviously also like the biomass that we used, really thick walls, really heavy insulation, using local materials, using local plants, all of these add to the comfort level of the inhabitants. And then moving to the other extreme, which is building habitat for other organisms. And this is where we started with recreating these forests inside cities. So using the Miyawaki method, as Joanna said, we started with this idea. What if our cities were as effective and generous as a forest, providing not only for ourselves, but for other species as well, in perfect balance with the operating conditions of planet Earth? So as an example, we have this issue of flooding, regular floods in the city of Beirut, right next to the concrete encased Beirut River. So how can we start by solving this issue? So using biomimicry at the systems level, we developed the Beirut River Genius of Place, and we decided to bring back some of the ecosystem services that the river used to provide in order to improve the resilience of the city and improve the living conditions of the communities nearby the concrete river. So this was our hero organism, the plane tree. And the plane tree can actually sequester about 3,000 gallons of water every year. So that's a huge amount. And it has very interesting features because it will retain 50% of the rainwater in its extensive canopy, which will then be evaporated back into the air, which will replenish the clouds and contribute to a healthier air quality. So what if our buildings, had green roofs that could hold that rainwater instead of just channeling it in gutters directly onto the street? What if the floor, instead of being concrete, was mimicking the forest floor, which is actually porous and allows that rainwater to infiltrate? What if we could slow down the rate by which the water was falling through the leaves, from the leaves to the stems, from the stems to the branches to the trunk, and then eventually back into the ground, which has had time to absorb the first layer of water and then the second layer. And the tree is also preventing soil erosion, by holding the soil in its roots and by diminishing the impact of the rain, again, through the leaves and the branches. So how does nature manage flow? So it's about embodying resilience through variation, redundancy, and decentralization. So some of the interventions which we came up with are blue-green streets, sponge parks, and green roofs, because they help us in protecting these natural and man-made assets. They help us maintain ecosystems and infrastructure, and they ensure public health services. So we propose to plant dense native forests to contribute for resilient cities. So inspired again by the natural ecosystem of the Beirut River, which you can see in all its beauty. This is what the river actually looks like in the city. So we witnessed first of all, the concrete riverbed, in which there's the dumping of garbage directly in the river. We have the dumping of raw sewage because of inadequate infrastructure. And we have the ongoing dumping of industrial waste directly in the river. And they all end up in the Mediterranean Sea, making them a local problem with a global impact. So we planted the very first native urban forest in Lebanon, Beirut's riverless forest. So you can see here the Beirut River encased in concrete. You can see the actual river in the summer is only sewage, because all of the fresh water is pumped at source by private water bottling companies that then, sell us bottled water in plastic bottles. And then all the towns, villages, cities, and industries dump their raw sewage directly into the riverbed. So what we started by doing is taking over this degraded land, which used to be an urban landfill, cleaning it up, and introducing this Miyawaki method. So we reintroduced the native forest that would have existed if the city had not been there. So this is the forest that would have existed on the banks of the river. So we have 22 different native species of trees and shrubs. And what we're doing is we're actually recreating the whole forest ecosystem. We're not just planting trees. We are actually planting the herb layer, the shrub layer, the small trees layer, medium trees, and then the canopy trees. Because we're recognizing, the Miyawaki method recognizes that a forest is not just a collection of trees, it's actually a whole ecosystem, which includes not only what we see visibly above ground, but also very importantly, what's below ground. So a lot of our work happens on treating the soil organically by doing like compost teas, increasing microbial activity, fungal activities in order to be able to support that forest, which is made up of all of these different layers. So this is our project, if you can see like on, before we started planting, and this is just 2 years later, the city already starts to disappear behind the dense forest. And this is another picture where you can see the river, and you can see here the two phases. This is the phase of the forest we planted in 2019. This is the phase of the forest we planted in 2021. So 2 years apart, and you can already see the huge transformation that happens. Another forest we did, so 150 square meters in a road median in the most polluted city in Lebanon, Zuq Musbih, because of the power plant that exists there. Another forest we planted in a rural area in Kharzebien, which gets snowed in every year. So this year we had 3 meters of snow over the forest. So just to show like the flexibility kind of this methodology that we are using. And then we also started building healing habitat. So how can we use the forest to heal not only the earth, but to heal back also our relationship with earth and nature and any traumas that we have. So we started this initiative with the Back to Play Forest, which is depaving the playgrounds of schools that were heavily impacted or destroyed by the explosion that happened in Beirut in August 2020. So working with the students to, so first of all, destroying the concrete flooring in the playgrounds and working with the students to learn about the native species and having them plant these native species with us. So in essence, the Other Forest is a nature-based tool for ecological and social regeneration in cities. where we're looking to reclaim degraded land as public space, regenerate ecological systems, and social connections as well. So far, we've planted more than 10 forests with about 10,000 trees and shrubs of 26 different native species, with the one goal to empower communities to reclaim degraded lands and turn them into a shared habitat for humans and other creatures to thrive. So going back to our surrounding environment, we have a very challenging surrounding. We are in a country that is not helping us thrive. Most businesses reinforce the abusive trend of greenwashing. Clients are not interested in investing in sustainable projects, and people still lack environmental interest and awareness. So how does nature learn? So internally, we expand our knowledge as a team through online courses, reading, books, webinars, workshops, and conferences, but also externally by raising awareness on environmental and social issues through our blog posts, workshops, site visits, maintenance sessions in our forest, planting sessions, and public talks. And if we look at how the other data has evolved, comparing this to the evolution of the forest, forest starts with bare rock that gets colonized by lichen. Eventually, we have small annual plants and lichens, then grasses, then shrubs, eventually having a mature forest of trees. So the other data started by establishing itself in a niche in sustainable architecture, which was not very prevalent in Lebanon or the region when we started back in 2010. So instead of competing for resources, we found another niche that didn't have that much competition in it to begin with. And now we're at a stage where we are sustaining. We are going exactly at the moment, going through a series of workshops with different consultants. We are looking at identifying our weaknesses and strengths, using our strategic resources and balancing out our pro bono and for-profit projects to fulfill our missions and vision. And so the idea is, can a business be profitable and make a positive impact? So we believe so. And we are still trying to make it happen by going above and beyond our comfort zone and redefining success. So for us, success is not about money. Success is about being intentional in what we do, using business frameworks and financial capital as tools to reach our goal, which is treading lightly on the earth and providing abundance for all living beings, humans and others. I can send this list of resources for those who are interested in that as well. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adibdada. Very inspirational. Definitely. Okay, I'll move towards the questions. How do you think artificial intelligence and its platform can contribute to expanding initiatives globally?
I think, maybe there's something to be said about connecting these different initiatives that are happening all over the world. So there's lots of grassroots initiatives, lots of bottom-up approaches that are happening in parts of the world and that are completely disconnected from each other. So maybe using artificial intelligence to actually connect these different initiatives together and comparing them by biomes, by places, so that we are again being locally attuned and responsive. We cannot take the same projects from Lebanon and apply them in Sweden, and we cannot take a project from Alaska and apply it in the desert. But there are definitely patterns in nature that will evolve in these kind of like extreme and seemingly opposite environments that we can learn from. And by connecting these different patterns and connecting these different small-scale initiatives, I think we can really increase the shift towards a more regenerative future.
Great. So cooperating on a global level on initiatives. This is it's a good thought. Is ecosystem services not just another method of controlling nature?
So definitely there's an inherent controversy when talking about ecosystem services, because the definition of ecosystem services is what is nature providing humans as services that are beneficial to us. So it is a kind of a good framework to use because it's understandable, and without going into the extreme of quantifying the value of nature through assigning a dollar value to nature, I think it's a useful framework to get the ideas across. So I use that knowing, like the limitations behind it. But I mean, it's also like nature, the river is providing benefits to the ecosystem as a whole. It is providing habitat not only for humans, but for all other organisms. It's providing fresh water and food for so many organisms and all of that. So it is looked at from a human-centric perspective, but I mean, it does apply to other organisms as well.
Okay, an interesting question. In case of hazardous chemicals that may run out of industries, what techniques will apply to remove them from the soil?
So we usually, there are different techniques to apply. We are not at the moment working on any sites that are hazardous. There are landfills. But they don't have like these industrial wastes in them. So at the moment we don't need to do anything because like whatever waste is in there will eventually break down with the soil, will break down with the collaboration of the mycorrhizal fungi and the trees, and different trees and plants and herbs will have kind of detoxifying effect. So we are not working in highly contaminated soils. In some cases, if you're working in a highly contaminated soil, what you can do is work with nature. So there are plants such as sunflowers that actually can take up heavy metals from the ground. But then the trick is, what do you actually do with them once they've taken that pollution out? So then you also have to harvest the sunflowers, and you have to dispose of them in a certain way, or you have to remove, then concentrate those heavy metals and remove them in another way, so there are ways to do it, but it's not something that we are specifically working on. Fungi are also fantastic also at removing different types of pollution from soil. So yeah, there are ways that exist, but I'm not an expert in that.
Have you found ways for the local communities to earn a living from your ecological projects?
So it depends how you define local. So on the context of the country, yes, because everything that we're working with, except for any tools, everything we're working with is actually locally sourced. So from the biomass that we use to feed the earth, the compost, the husk, the straw, all of that is produced locally. So we're working with local farmers. We're working with local organizations that are taking food waste and turning it and transforming it into compost. So we are contributing to that local economy. We also buy all of our saplings from local nurseries that work specifically with native plants. And we also hire contractors, labor, all of that come from the local community. So that's how we contribute in a kind of financial manner.
Thank you so much, Adi. Thank you so much. We will be moving on to our next panelist, our esteemed panelist, Johan Mwangi. Johan Mwangi is a brilliant biochemist and entrepreneur from Kenya. He's the founder of Green Nettle Textiles, which is a social entrepreneurship that won the Global Change Awards. It was the first winner of the Global Change Awards. And he contributes to his local community, to small farmers, and what his entrepreneurship does, it increases their livelihood. Johan is also a contributor to startups in his community, so he funds and he mentors emerging startups. Johan, the platform is yours. Welcome.
Hello, good afternoon and good evening, based to where you are. Thank you for hosting me here. I'm John Mwangi, the CEO and the founder of Green Nettle Textiles. I'm a biochemist by profession and someone who is much interested in things to do with biomimicry and biological processes. So I'll go directly to screen sharing. Sorry, can you hear me? Like Joanne?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we see the green nettle textile. I think it's your first slide, right?
Yeah, perfect. Okay, Regenerative Textile is a social company. It's a social and a biological company that is working to reinvent fashion and eliminate high amount of textile of environmental polluting textiles that are imported in Africa as secondary clothing from what is disposed of in Europe and Americas. Our aim is to be a home of sustainable textile, to be a brand, and also to be a change maker here in Africa. The main idea came from a challenge, from first a problem which was presented by increasing population in Africa, where most people, because most lands are owned by government, and people on the farm in highlands. And as population is increasing, most people who have highlands have a challenge, and people are moving to those steep slopes to try and farm. There is a lot of degradative farming. As the first photo shows, those are landslides. And in 2020 alone, like a country in Kenya, more than 50 people were confirmed dead by landslides, and more than 600 were displaced. This is because of degradative farming, clearing of vegetation, and clearing of vegetation, and what I'd say, like non-sustainable farming on this land. If you try to produce food in this land, there is a lot of groundwater and soil erosion, river siltation. All those challenges come from degradative farming that happens on steep slopes. On the other hand, Kenya, like many African countries, are importers of secondary clothing. This is from what is disposed of in Europe and Americas, comes to Africa as secondary clothes. We buy, we wear. Within 1 year, those clothes are lost and they end up in dumpsite fires. This does a lot of pollution and importation of carbon credit. So as Regenerative Textile, we took the problem that we have in Africa of a lot of degradative farming of steep slopes, and opportunity that is presented by growing population which needs sustainable clothing. And this is what we did. We have farmers with a lot of steep slopes who need a sustainable and an economical solution to do regenerative farming. So stinging nettle is a common plant that grows in Africa, Asia, and Europe, and also America. It's a very common plant which grows almost naturally. In most highlands in Kenya, there are two varieties of stinging nettles that grows naturally, and once you harvest, it will be able to regenerate itself. It's like you just leave what grows, the vegetation that grows on those steep slopes grow. Then we commercialize that. We commercialize that through biological extraction of eco fiber. And this biological extraction of that fiber is bioenhancing the normal letting process that will happen if I cut down stinging nettle, leave them on ground, the biological process will start. So what we do is we enhance this biological process at farmers' point to ensure that the local community can go out in the steep slopes, because they are the one who owns these steep slopes. They can be able to go harvest the vegetation that is there, pre-process that, and sell pre-processed fibers to us, which we take through an industrial process, that is mechanical processing, and come out with a yarn. And this yarn is what we use to produce the products that we have here. Currently, we have mats, but we have not been able to produce wearables. For one reason, nettle ecofiber production is, as someone said initially, innovation is messy. Producing soft fiber is messy using biological process, but we are working on this and trying to incorporate something to do with enzymatic fiber processing to be able to produce soft fibers. Our technology is a combination of biological biological and mechanical extraction currently, but we aim to go ahead and use enzymatic production, which doesn't lead to any environmental pollution. The main name we chose, okay, during the lab process, as I'm a biochemist, I started this project in 2015 when I was doing my undergraduate, and I did a lot of fiber processing, chemical fiber processing, enzymatic fiber processing, and biological fiber processing. The main name why we ended up selecting biological letting process is because it can be incorporated in small communities which are distributed everywhere. Then we can be able to like aggregate the pre-processed fiber at one point. The beauty of biological letting process is that we don't only get fiber. As a company, we get fiber, that's our interest. But farmers also are able not only to be empowered economically, but to get biofertilizer and biopesticide from this process. So for them, it's triple advantage. They are able to commercialize their conservation efforts, that's regenerative farming, sell fiber to us, be able to get biopesticide, at the same time, be able to get biofertilizer. When we compare what we are doing, because we are in textile industry, and the reason why maybe nature-based fibers or bast fibers, if you go to US, the likes of hemp, the likes of nettle, or silk, the reason why they are not like too famous or too available in market is because cotton, polyesters, and other skin, which are, I'd say they are easily produced, but they have a lot of cost in terms of environmental pollution as well as carbon credits as they produce. When we compare what we have with what we can call ecofibers in Africa and regional market, we shall say, when we are compared with the likes of wool, the environmental conservation effort that we take into place is more visible because we use what is considered as degraded lads. We are circularly beneficial in that we are able to involve the local community, use what is degraded, what cannot be used as a commercial lad, co-produce with them in pre-processing, so they have even the ownership of what we produce. Unlike most fibers or most textiles that are produced, because it is a company which owns everything. Farmers produce raw material, we process everything, we sell to market. But we create this circular benefit, like even local farmers are appreciating this conversation of eco and sustainable clothing because they can own up whatever is being produced. They are part of the process. And after all, if we look at the landscape or fast forward 2030, where we want to be, the scale of bast fiber production through regenerative agriculture and converting degraded lads into useful lads, there is huge potential of scale because it's a new environment which people haven't thought about or aren't taking a lot of efforts into it. With an investment in environmental conservation, then these degradative farms have become a point of interest. And to take a simple scenario in Kenya, there are a lot of lakes in Rift Valley which are being buried, and we are staring at an ecological disaster because of high level of soil erosion in highlands, river siltation, lakes are being buried, and we are almost having a salty and a freshwater lake margin. And people are becoming, the interest now has refocused from now conserving lakes to ensuring that rivers that are draining into lakes are clean, doesn't have a lot of erosion. And that's where we are seeing a lot of opportunities in those degraded lands, because for many years, organizations have been trying to do tree planting in those degraded areas, but community have been fighting back, because once you plant a tree today, you will be able to harvest that in 25 years' time. The community which is allowed in that area want to benefit tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, and in the next week. So we need a quick turnaround crop which can be able to offer the same conservation effort at the same time being beneficial to the community, and the community can be able to own it. That's why we see a huge potential of scaling in whatever we are doing, both in regenerative agriculture as well as eco fiber production. Our whole idea our whole idea is embedded with whatever biomimicry approach to be able to produce textile which which are inspired by nature, are part of the nature, and the process also conserves nature. And this comes in one way. First is regenerative agriculture. We don't plant anything. We don't go and tell people, buy seeds, plant this, farm this way. Let nettle grow, because nettle is a native shrub in this area. And in this part of regenerative agriculture, most of these degraded lands have high level of pollution. I think Abdidada said this. There is a lot of pollution, a lot of contamination, industrial waste. And one thing that we are doing, nettle is a very hardy crop and can be used for phytoremediation and phytomining, extracting these heavy metals from the soil. And we can put the resultant crop into an economical and beneficial use. Yes, growing nettle on its own, even if you don't have to, if you let nettle grow and cut it down and don't use it economically, it have a carbon sink of around 3 tons per acre, which is too good when compared to trees that can be grown in that area, in the same said area. But if you can be able to use this in contaminated soil, be able to trap those heavy metals and minerals and put the resultant crop into an ecological use, then we shall be contributing a lot into environmental conservation and also in water pollution, in eliminating water pollution and controlling water pollution. There is biological extraction process, which we chose, although it is hard and the hardest of all processes which you can use in product manufacturing. The reason why we use this is because of the emission level. A biological process doesn't need a lot of chemicals. So the input that you are putting in a biological process means it is a low carbon emission process. And using the light biological process like we do leads to zero waste, because everything that we are able to produce, like even the wastewater, can be used as fertilizer. Our wastewater can be enhanced and be used as pesticide. And the beauty of selecting like nettle for fiber production is because we can be able to use all parts. We use the stalks for eco-fiber extraction. Because of the biological extraction process, the peels can be used in eco-paper production. Shoots and leaves can be used in alternative nutrition. This one crop which we chose, which is used from stem up to the shoots. The crop after harvest can be able to regenerate itself. 3 months is back to harvest. And the beauty in Africa, we have that climate. We don't have those extreme summers or extreme winters, so it can grow year round. What we are working on, because innovation is a continuous process, is enhanced biochemical process or bioenzymatic process. We are challenged because there are no research institutes, not only in Kenya, but also in Africa, which are keen in eco-textile field. So even if you have to do any trial, we have to send our samples maybe to USA. If you have to do a comparative analysis, we go to Asia all the way to Nepal. We are working with traditional community in Nepal in enhancing the nettle fiber extraction procedures. So the reason why we have a star in this is because we want bioenzymatic process to fasten the process and be able to get a product which have the same strength, same quality, same strength and same quantity when compared to those that comes from something like maybe denim or cotton, because that's what we are competing with. Yes, we are in nature, but when it comes to market, when it comes to commercialization, when it comes to scaling, we must look at which products are we competing with in market, and to lower the cost, because most sustainable products are very expensive. If you go to buy like an eco textile vis-a-vis a conventional textile, it is 10 or 20 times higher. And in the market that we are in, considering we are in Africa, that market doesn't appreciate the value of conservation. These people doesn't have a lot of money. They are more considered about what to wear and what to eat next at the least cost, rather than the value of what they wear or what they wear the impact of what they were having in the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. So you're also being locally attuned and responsive because you're using readily available material, which is Nettle. So I will move to the questions. So why do you consider that natural fibers such as silk and wool are not suitable for circular systems?
Okay, we don't, the reason why we compare to them is because we appreciate that comparison table is because we appreciate the value that the wool and the silk have. But at long last, we look at the tail end. If we scale wool, we mean we have to layer more sheep. What is the impact of layering more sheep have on the environment? How easy is it? How many people can be able to benefit from this process? Yes, Kenya was the leading exporter of low wool in 1990, early 2000, but they no longer do this. Why? The size of farm is decreasing day in, day out. How long does it take to produce 1 kg of wool from a small sheep, from a lab up to the shaving age? It takes a lot of time. So we are looking into a solution which can be able to be implemented quickly, can scale, and can be able to impact to a lot of people.
Okay, I think the point is that metal can be regenerative in specifically your community. So is it just a solution that is used locally in where you live in your region?
Sorry, pardon?
Okay, the question is, I think the point that metal can be regenerative in your specific community, so in the region where you live. So what I understand from the question is that can it be replicated in other ecosystems or in other regions of the world?
Yes. I'll take Nepal because most traditional Nepalese community, I was in Nepal and we were doing our second pilots in Nepal with traditional community because they are like a model. They are like, that's where you look to when you talk about nettle fiber, because they have lived, traditional communities in Nepal have lived for thousands of years, depending on their mountain, without farming on those mountains, 100% dependent on nettle fiber. So it can be replicated to other areas, especially in Africa, because Africa is not a small community, it's a whole continent. I see this with a middle of Africa and Asia, but this thing is being done in Germany. I think there is a company which have been doing nettle research for the last 13 years. The only problem with Europe is because they have to do enhanced nettle because they have winters, summer, and cannot be able to produce year round. So what they have is they are trying to bioengineer their nettle to produce more fiber than any other leaves and shoot and everything else, and be able to produce this commercially. But it's hard. It's hard when it comes to Europe because of year-round production and also the economies of scale, because everything there is expensive. In Africa, you can be able to produce this almost at free because the government has failed. Okay, a lot of companies have tried tree planting on this degradative farming, but they have failed. But we are partnering, with one in Mount Kenya, where they plant indigenous tree and we plant nettle. People harvest nettle as they're taking care of trees. So to us, it is easy to apply this in Africa, but it can be applied in other areas.
This idea is best.
Sorry?
The next question, the idea is best. Would you brief the role players, particularly in case of regenerative agriculture? So what are the role players in regenerative agriculture?
Sorry, if I get this well, is other
players. the role players in the regenerative agriculture. So what is who are the people who are benefiting from this project? Who are the role players in this project or the stakeholders?
Okay, there is those role players, those people who like are working with us in regenerative agriculture. First is conservationist. I said it's a very huge, we are working in a very huge ecosystem, only that we have been able to simplify this to a point where we can be able to impact. We can be able to impact in generating eco-textile from what is produced from degradative farming. But the role players in this whole ecosystem are, one, conservationists, because Africa lives by rivers, and rivers are part of our life. Whatever you see, 7 wonders of the world, the Great Migration, without Mara River, we cannot have the Great Migration. Without us conserving Mao ecosystem, we cannot have Mara River. Today, you come to see 7 wonders of the world, the Great Migration of the world beast. The river is brown. It's no longer the clear water that we used to see when we were kids. So wherever we are working, and in the field we are working in regenerative, and mind you, I have to quote this, the government of Kenya is evicting allowed 10,000 households, allowed more forest because of degradative farming. It's something which is at critical point as we are talking today, because most of this degradative farming happens at or allowed water towers. The role players, the main players whom we are working with are conservation. These are conservation companies. Hotels, tourist hotels play a big role in this. But people who are benefiting from this are, one, local communities. Local communities who are able to use degradative farming in a commercial way and in a continuous beneficial way, and they can be able to own up the project. Two, people who are living in midstream and downstream, because by us controlling the flow of water from the steep slopes, from us ensuring that clean water goes downstream, from us ensuring that there are not a lot of fertilizers application in the highlands. People from midstream and lowlands are able to get clean water. It may be a retro impact as at now, but once we're able to do thousands and thousands of acres in the highlands, this will be visible. Disappearing rivers will come back because there are no situation, there is no erosion. The fourth and the most important people from the business point of view are people who are eco-conscious. Those people who are lacking something to attach to, or that brand which you can attach to and say, what I wear conserves the environment. What I wear leads to environmental conservation. To us, those are the critical people who we are looking into. And once we are doing our bio-innovation, design thinking, we work a lot with these middle-class people who want to wear things which are environmental and sustainable conscious.
Okay, so the planting of nettle is actually benefiting many people, as you said, conservationists and also the people who are living in this ecosystem. So it's having a very beneficial role to many like indirect stakeholders who are also benefiting from this project as well. Yeah. Great. Okay. So another question, since the method is still in its early stages of development, would the scaling up of this method take away from its environmental benefits?
The scaling up of this method take away from... Okay, from our company's point of view, no, we could have done it easier. If our aim was just to produce nettle fiber, we could have produced this using chemical methods, because I think Italy and Germany has a company that is doing very well in that. They have one-stop machine which uses a chemical process to be able to produce these fibers. But our company's DNA is well structured to 100% concentrate in production of sustainable eco fiber from stinging nettle that is grown 100% from degradative steep slopes. There is a reason why we cannot go along and tell people with arable lands to do stinging nettle, because we have a very dedicated ecosystem in Africa, a very dedicated ecosystem. Today, we are food insecure. Today, we don't have water. We need more land to produce food. At the same time, we need to produce clothes because population is on increase. At the same time, the demand of clothing will also be on increase. We are closing down, and this lesson was well taught during Corona period. You stop shipping of second-hand clothes from America and Europe, Africa will go naked, unfortunately, because importation of this fast fashion second-hand clothing have already killed most textile industries in Africa. trying to revive these companies means more has to be put on cotton. Everyone knows the reason. Okay, everyone knows the impact that cotton has, the cotton production has, both on environment and to people. So it's a very delicate ecosystem. But for us, even on scale, we aim and we hope we shall be able to maintain the core DNA, ecofiber, biological processes, circular benefit, and sustainability.
Okay, next question. What are the benefits of using nettle-based fabrics from a biomimetic point of view?
I think I discussed this in the last slide.
Biomimetic, but more, how do you replicate it as you talked about the biomimetic part as it being using biomimicry and like being in a regenerative system and benefiting its stakeholders. Yeah. But I think it's more of a literal biomimetic point of view that the person who asked the question is looking for an explanation for.
I think I'm not getting the question right. Okay.
Oh, okay. For example, the use of energy in this project, is it something that also you are tackling and measuring?
Okay. Currently we are, as we said, we are in early stage, and these are some of the points which are looking into. But we were more concentrated on carbon credits. I think that's what, as a company, we have been working on. But I don't know the use of energy, the management of energy, which we are supposed to tackle on this. But what we know, the biological process is energy safe, because the enhanced biological process use, I don't know how to put it, but we use nature as it is. The point of enhancing comes all along with control of pressure, temperatures, but this closed system which doesn't need external energy input. It's not like biochemical processing or chemical processing, where we have to use a lot of energy, up, down, heating, cooling. No, it's biological process almost happen. Take it as fermentation. Take a biological process more like a fermentation. You don't use a lot of energy, you use more time. I think that's how I can be able to put it.
So you're using more energy in order to gain time in producing your textile. So it's something that it's still taking a lot of energy to produce, but it doesn't take chemicals, which is good. It's not toxic, but it takes a lot of energy to be fabricated.
Okay, I'll say that. I'll say we use a lot of time. Time, yes. External energy inputs maybe can be compensated in time.
Okay. Okay, so the downside of that is that it will take more time to fabricate if you're to use less energy for it to be efficient in energy. So yeah, these are constraints that one would think about in order to push your business forward and your production. So it's a good reflection. Great.
Okay.
Okay, I have another question. I want to ask you about your product's life cycle. Like, for example, the textile, how long is it used? How long would it be functional before it's recycled or before it's disposed? Because it's also a biodegradable product. So how does the life cycle of the product function?
Okay, I don't have the scientific data with me now, but it's something that we did. The life cycle of nettle fiber slightly above cotton, and we don't advocate. Okay, from the company point of view, we don't advocate for recycling, because recycling strives revenue from the company, but the beauty is it's biodegradable. So we want, once you use it, you are able to dispose it and it will safely compost on cloud. So for us, what we did, I don't have data with me now, but we had Dr. Penina Kamau. She's a textile technician for over 15 years. She did this for us, and the life cycle of network fiber is slightly longer than the cotton.
Thank you so much, Jonna. Thank you so much. Okay, I think for time's sake, we need to wrap up our event. So thank you so much to all our panelists for your brilliant inputs and inspirational work. I invite everyone to continue getting inspired by nature and not being afraid to try new ideas and to develop biomimetic ideas and work towards innovation. So thank you very much for all of you for participating, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you so much, everyone.